edition of Education, we are looking at why we should gamify our learning because, let's be honest, I am a huge fan. Without being cringy and without undermining the actual principles of our classroom. Good morning. As I said, today is Saturday, the 15th of February. I think I said that, 2025. And this is your Saturday breakfast show with me, your host, Darren Lester. I hope you are all well this morning. I'm sorry that I wasn't with you last week. That was a bit impromptu. I had every intention of being with you. I had the show planned out and everything, but then we decided to have a bit of an impromptu gathering of my doctoral class at uni, which for me involves an hour train ride. So I kind of decided to make it worthwhile. Decided that we would meet first thing, which meant that I did have to not have breakfast with you all last week, which was a shame for me because you know how much I love being here. But I hope that you've had a good fortnight regardless. For me, it's been quite exciting on the doctoral front. I know that I talk about this a lot, so I'm really, really sorry if if you guys are not interested. But it is part of my journey as a teacher, and you know that's why we're here at Teachers Talk Radio to share our journeys with you. So we did meet, me and just a couple of others, last week to kind of kickstart the thesis writing process, because that's the phase that we're in now. I keep saying that I will do a show on what it's like to do an EdD, and I will do one. I might try and get some of my cohort on to have a chat about it. So, you know, guys, if you're listening, I hope you are listening, because I plug the show enough in our lessons. Be ready for that. But in essence, it's in two parts, the part A and part B. Part A is the taught part. So we spent the first 2 years going to lectures. You guys know that because I every so often I would cry off of the show because I was at uni. We would write assignments, we would submit them, all that jazz. And then the assignments would be graded. We have to get a specific grade in order to progress on then to the thesis portion, which I have now done. We had that confirmation a few weeks ago that we had got the grades that we needed to progress. We were told who our supervisors were. That was really good. I think a state of panic set in when it became real that this was what was going to happen. And so, yeah, we decided that we were going to meet and kind of do our panicking and do our faffing together, which then meant we could sort of get started on the actual writing process in earnest. Then on Wednesday just gone, I had a meeting with my supervisors. We get 2 supervisors. I know that the number of supervisors that people get for a doctorate, they vary based on where you are and what you're studying. We get 2. I met with both of mine this week. We had a really good meeting. I was kind of given some really good advice on how to get going and how to orient my research and exactly what I need to be doing to get started. So yeah, on the doctoral front, it's been a really exciting week. On the teaching front, for me, it has been a good one. A few new students have enrolled in my class, which is always nice. In case you're not sure, my predominant job right now is as head of classics at an online school, and we kind of have rolling enrollment. So my classes will change all the time based on whenever students decide that they want to join us. So I've had a couple of new students come in this week, so that was exciting as I got to know them. I've had some really interesting discussions with students on the use of English in translation and kind of getting them to think about how when we are translating from, in this case, Latin into English. But actually, I had a very similar conversation with my year 13 French student as well about the translation from French into English, about how it's very important to get the English standard and grammatically correct in inverted commas, because as anybody who has studied English at A level or above will know, we don't in English talk about things being right or wrong. We talk about whether they are standard or not standard, because we recognize that there are varieties of English all across the world. And so I think the Latin student that I was talking to, was a little bit shocked when I explained some of the grammatical rules of English that he needed to follow in order to accurately translate this specific piece of Latin, because it was a form of English, it was a use of English that he was convinced was wrong. I'm fairly sure he thought that I was wrong. So that was quite an interesting back and forth that we had this week. But I enjoyed that. It was nice to kind of have that intellectual rigor. And I know sometimes as a teacher it can be a little bit frustrating when your students question you, because you can quite often just have the default reaction of, well, I've learned this to a higher level than you, that's why I'm in the position to be able to teach it, so I know. But also, I do quite like, we talk a lot about building relationships and kind of having that positivity in your classroom. And I do like when students feel comfortable enough to question, particularly when you are kind of changing something that they've long held as a belief or an assumption. In fact, I did that twice this week, because with one of my new students, I had to break it to her that the Greek god Apollo isn't actually called Apollo in ancient Rome, and she didn't like that, because all of the things that she has read, all of the mythological retellings, all of the textbooks, all of the non-fiction, they've all called him Apollo. And I sort of had to go, well, no, he was Apollo in Greek, but he was Apollon in Latin, and that N, it does make a difference. And it can be really difficult when we challenge assumptions. It's really difficult when we challenge our own assumptions. And it's really difficult when we challenge the assumptions of our students, because that puts us in a position of undoing a lot of learning and of having to rebuild that. But from a social constructivist point of view, that is kind of the point of our job. Because if you follow social constructivism as your pedagogy, if that's kind of the theory that you buy into, then you understand, you believe that children come into your classroom with, or I should say learners, because many of my learners are in fact not children. They come into your classroom knowing, again, in inverted commas, knowing things, but the things that they know are not always correct. It's assumptions that they've made. It's things that they have been taught incorrectly somewhere else. It's things that they have made their own conclusions about, but not fully understood. I've told this story before about the Year 5 science lesson I delivered a long, long time ago, where the child was convinced that pencils were liquid. We were doing states of matter, and I explained that, solids change their form. Sorry, no, I didn't say that, because that would be wrong. I explained that solids keep their form, whereas liquids take on the form of the container that they are in. And so to this child, pencils were a liquid because when you took a group of pencils and you put them into a round pencil pot, they made a round. And that was, of course, weirdly advanced thinking, because it was almost like she was seeing each individual pencil as a molecule within this shape of the bunch of pencils. But I took her over to the sink that was in my classroom, dropped a pencil in, and she was genuinely shocked that the pencil retained its shape. So we undid that thinking, we undid that incorrect conclusion. Now, this is not me sitting here championing social constructivism for absolutely no reason. You know, I was trained as a social constructivist. I've explained this on the show before. So that is always kind of my default position when we talk about pedagogy. But I recognize that we don't actually know. We don't know the best way to teach somebody something. All we can do is our best and hope that they learn the lessons that we want them to learn. So yeah, on the teaching front, it's been a really interesting week. So I've had quite a good time, really, since I was here last. I am glad now to be back in the studio. I am glad to be back with you. Excuse me, we've got quite a good run now of one... Oh, actually, I say this. We've got a good run of 2 weeks. We've got our show this week. I will be back with you next week. Then, of course, the following week, the 1st of March, that is TTR Connect. And I will be speaking. I will be speaking in the MFL strand about communities of practice. So I will not be with you then. But if you are able to come up to Manchester and visit with us live, there is a whole host of people who will be there to talk about some amazing things, amazing changes in pedagogy, amazing developments in pedagogy across the whole of the TTR curricula. This is the first time that Tom has tried to organize something that involves all subject areas all at the same time. Usually we just have our own kind of insular meetings. So it'll be really interesting to meet with other specialists and to see what they have to say.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC News reports on changes to apprenticeships. Businesses employing adult apprentices will now, according to the DfE, have the power to decide whether a maths and English qualification should be part of the prescribed course. This could mean 10,000 more apprentices are able to complete courses every year. According to the new site, more than 90,000 people over the age of 19 began apprenticeships between August and October 2024. However, more than 45% of apprentices drop out of schemes without completing the course. This is according to recent official DfE figures. The government said it hoped that relaxing the rules for apprentices over the age of 19 will ensure more students are both applying for and completing apprenticeships. in sectors particularly where there continues to be high demand, such as healthcare, social care and construction. Apprentices aged 16 to 18 will still have to complete an English and Maths functional skills qualification, equivalent to a GCSE, as a course requirement. The government has also confirmed plans to reduce the minimum duration of an apprenticeship from 12 months to 8 months from August 2025. The move has also been welcomed by many businesses, who say it will help employers fill skills gaps more quickly. Whilst failing to secure a qualification in maths or English is one of the key reasons apprentices do not complete courses, an education think tank is also quoted in the article as saying poor quality schemes are also a factor. The chief executive of Lifetime, England's largest apprenticeship provider, welcomed the changes, but also said he was disappointed the change was not fully extended to apprentices aged 16 to 18. Full details and comments from those following the current apprenticeship courses can be found on the BBC News website. Schools Week carries an opinion piece on workload and changes to Ofsted, focusing in particular on the impact changes and developments can have on staff who work in and leaders of small schools. The piece by the head teacher of a primary school highlights the fact that Department for Education and Ofsted have the same expectations of a school, regardless of its size. The article focuses on the outcome of a Freedom of Information request submitted to Department for Education about the statutory roles a school is required to have a named person for, and a list of the roles it is good practice to have a named person for. The response from the Department for Education, as quoted in the piece, was, "The department holds the information you requested, but it is being withheld because the department is not required to provide information in response to a request if it is already reasonably accessible to you." However, the piece goes on to say that having accessed all of the documentation on the Statutory Guidance for Schools website, and running them through an AI program to see how long it would take a human to read them, the outcome was concerning: between 29 and 40 days of uninterrupted work. The article closes with a concern that the information itself is actually not reasonably accessible, and that perhaps finding staff to complete the statutory roles is similarly challenging. In Wales Online, a story about Saturday detentions is featured. Those of a certain age will remember the film The Breakfast Club, which focused on an unlikely mix of students forced to spend a Saturday together after behaviour incidents in school. In Wales, however, a school led by a man dubbed Wales's strictest headmaster, where staff had previously been on strike over physical and verbal abuse from pupils, has just introduced the weekend detentions. The head teacher has said the decision was made because other forms of discipline had not been effective. According to the article, the school has also introduced other creative ways of disciplining pupils, including on some occasions asking their parents to attend class and sit next to them. Poorly behaved pupils have also been asked to carry out supervised litter picking. It's not the first time the school has made media headlines. In the past, it has also featured in the news for enforcing strict uniform policies. Further details can be found on Wales Online. Finally, the Nigerian Guardian reports that a Lagos-based educational institution has unveiled a campus in the UK. The campus will provide English language upskilling courses, leadership training, summer camps for students aged between 10 and 17, and a pre-masters programme for graduates seeking academic refinement before enrolling in UK universities. Speaking at the official launch of the campus at the residence of British Deputy High Commissioner, representatives of the school praised the school's expansion, saying it served as a bridge connecting cultures, ideas and aspirations, and that it symbolised a shared vision for an education system that transcends borders. The British Deputy High Commissioner to Nigeria also highlighted the importance of fostering trade between Nigeria and the UK. Further details can be found online. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
As ever, thank you for that, Joe. Really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. I do want to think a little bit before we get into the meat of today's show, about employability, because I had this conversation with somebody well, not really a conversation, it was a very short exchange with somebody yesterday. There was a post on the forum about is there any use in doing a PhD in humanities? Because everybody who posts on doctoral forums, they tend to be in STEM. And so as a humanities person or as a social sciences person, mine is technically under the social sciences umbrella, even though as a linguist I do consider myself a humanities person. And so, you know, we do tend to get a lot of STEM people talking on the PhD fora, and a lot of the conversation is around employability. And you know, there are always conversations about, is it better once you've got your PhD, is it better to go into academia or into industry? You know, what industries are you going into with your PhD? How is it creating job opportunities? And those job opportunities are fewer and farther between for those of us in the humanities and the social sciences than in STEM. And so this person posted on the forum, is there actually any point? You know, if a job isn't guaranteed at the end of a PhD, what's the point of doing one? And so I kind of replied and I said, you know, employability is important, of course, but also, you know, you should do a higher degree because you love your subject, because you want the intellectual stimulation, you want the research training, you want the rigor. You know, there are a whole host of reasons to study something that does not boil down to employability. But quite often, I think, as teachers, we do fall into the employability trap. I've done it myself. You know, when people, particularly in year 11, when they say, oh, well, why should I study French at A level? You know, why should I do German next year instead of science? And the first thing that I think comes out of most people's mouths is, well, because employers are looking for language skills. You know, you are more likely to get a job if you have a second language as opposed to only having one. Both of which are true. But why is all education centered in employability? Why have we lost this idea that we are allowed to study just because we want the stimulation? Why have we lost the idea that we're allowed to study just because it's interesting, just because it's something that we enjoy? So that's something I'm not really going to speak any more on right now because I've spent hardly any time thinking about it. But it is quite interesting to me, you know, as apprenticeships are being reviewed, as they're being shortened so that we get our young people out into the workforce more quickly. You kind of think, well, why are they not being allowed to still have that time to learn? Why is it a priority to get them out into work quicker, as opposed to giving them extra skills, giving them time to refine those skills, to perfect those skills, or just to enjoy that process of learning? Why are we so against having a good time in education? And I guess that kind of is what my show today is about. Because one of the criticisms that always gets levied against the gamification of education is that it's too fun. It's not serious enough. It's not academic enough. And my response to that is always, what is wrong with having a good time? Why are we actually so against this idea that learning can be fun, that learning can be interesting, that learning can be a way to broaden your mind? Why are we so against that? And so I've been thinking a lot about gamification over the past few weeks. I think I'm always thinking about gamification. I like games. I like to play games. I play a lot of games. I am very upset at the moment because my Nintendo Switch won't turn on, which is incredibly annoying because I don't want to buy a new one when they've just announced that there's going to be the Switch 2 coming out quite soon. Not sponsored. Other games consoles are available, though if anybody would like to sponsor Saturday Morning Breakfast Show, we might be open to it. Just get in touch. But I play mobile games on my tablet. I still do Wordle pretty much every day. In always at least English, French, and German. And then I will dip in and out of Wordle in my other languages as I have time. I am very much in favour of playing games. And the education system is very much in favour of playing games. If you look at the EYFS, the Early Years Foundation Stage curriculum, it's all about learning through play. If you remember your own time in nursery school, in play school, in reception, you will probably remember things like the home corner, where there were the little role play things that were set up. You will probably remember sandpits and water trays and cars and paints and maybe computers if you were in reception a little bit after I was. But it's all about that discovery. Learning through play is all about discovery. But for some reason, we get rid of that. We switch off this idea that learning through play is important after the kids turn 5. And from then on, it has to be a lot more, let's sit in our chair and do a worksheet. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why. I remember a story that I saw on social media years and years ago, so I don't remember any of the details apart from the actual story. And it was this lady who was talking about her child transitioning from reception into year 1. And the year 1 teacher in the school was new to the school. And the child sat in the car one day on like her first or second day of being in year 1. And they were driving home and the mum asked, oh, how was your day? And the child said, oh, it was fine. But you can tell that my teacher's new because she doesn't know that we're supposed to play. And I thought that was so lovely that the child assumed that playing was what school was about, that playing was what learning was about, and that the teacher was in the wrong for doing worksheets with them and, all of the stuff that we usually do as they move into Key Stage 1, into Key Stage 2, 3, 4, 5. And that has stuck with me. That has stuck with me because that child clearly understands that she learns through play. Because children know that they go to school to learn. They understand that that's the point of being in school. And that child clearly knew that she needed play, or that she should be having play in order to learn. But quite often when we see children playing, we don't see the learning that is taking place. We don't see the exploration that is happening. We don't see the social skills that are going on. We just see them having a good time. And for whatever reason, oh, excuse me, I don't know why I'm coughing so much today. Podbean, if anybody in Podbean is listening, I need a cough button, please. We don't tend to think too much about the educational value of play after the children turn 5 years old. And we then just see it as them blowing off some steam and enjoying themselves. But you can learn while you're enjoying yourself. In fact, you should learn while you're enjoying yourself, because that's how things stick. And that's how you want to learn. That's how we build up motivation. is by making sure that they are having a good time while they are learning. So I kind of have jumped back on my gamification bandwagon in the past couple of weeks. And this week I went into one of my shallow dives into gamification, because one of the things that I have noticed is that quite often gamification of learning does feel a little bit cringe. It does feel like we are trying to speak to the kids on their level and not hitting the mark. It feels like that "Hello, fellow kids" meme, where you've got the old man with his backwards baseball cap and his skateboard, and he's in an American high school. He's walked up to a couple of people and says, "Hello, fellow kids." That is sometimes how gamification feels, because we don't actually properly gamify the learning. What we do is we take our regular lesson and we just kind of paint the veneer of a game on top of it. And we don't really make sure that the two things mesh. So in my research this week, I've been looking at what gamification should be, what gamification is, and kind of how we can get from the current to the ideal, how we can make that leap so that gamification is an actual learning tool. It's not a proxy for learning. We did a show a few weeks ago where I talked about how there are so many proxies for learning, how there are so many things that we think are learning but actually aren't. They're just kids doing work. And I've been thinking about how we can make sure that it's not cringy, that it doesn't look like we're trying too hard. It doesn't look like we are coming down to their level, that many kids, particularly as they get older, will find patronizing. Because I don't think that gamification should stop in year 6. I don't think that gamification should stop in year 9. I don't think the gamification should stop in year 13. I remember a paper that I read, again, years and years and years ago, which was about how a Latin lecturer in the US, so at university level, was running a Dungeons and Dragons style game in Latin with his beginners. And if you listened to my show 2 weeks ago on 3 weeks ago, on lessons that we should take from tabletop RPGs and teaching like a dungeon master, you will know that I've done the same thing in my French lessons up to year 11. And, you know, I recognize the privilege here in being a language teacher, because pretty much everything involves language. So if it exists, I can do it in French. I can do it in Chinese. I can do it in Japanese, whatever I happen to be teaching. So I do have an inherent privilege in my subject. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't take advantage of it. Just because it's a privilege doesn't mean that it should be ignored. So over the course of the next just shy of an hour, we've got about 55 minutes together. We're going to talk about what gamification is, what gamification isn't, where we go wrong when we gamify, and how we can attempt to do it successfully. As always, if you've got anything that you would like to say, if you want to join in the conversation today, please do. If you are listening live in the Podbean app, you can text me straight from the app. I will read your message out on air and we can engage that way. If you are not listening live on the Podbean app, if you're listening live to me elsewhere, then you can message me via X, formerly Twitter. I do need to open that tab because that's not the default for me anymore, or via Blue Sky. I am at Mr. D Lester. That's MRDLESTER on both. And again, I will read your message out live on there and we can engage that way. And once again, if you are listening in the future, if it is not currently 9:35 on Saturday, the 15th of February, 2025, when you are listening to me, you can still message me on either of those systems because, as I always say, these are things I'm interested in. These are concepts that I'm interested in. For as long as I am teaching, I will be interested in them. And so I am more than happy to engage with you about them. And in fact, I love engaging with you about them. I love building that community of practice. So let's define our terms. I'm learning to be a good academic. Gamification, according to Detterding in 2011, is the application of game elements to non-gaming contexts. So being in school isn't a game. It's not. We can't pretend that it is, because that would be strange. And so that's why we talk about gamifying the learning, because we take something that inherently isn't a game, such as learning your times tables, learning your verb conjugations, learning your periodic table, whatever it might be, this memorization of facts, this application of skills, but adding game elements to them. Now, often we add the wrong elements to them, which is where we go wrong in gamification. So often we misuse the gaming mechanics in order to focus on extrinsic motivators, such as points or badges or leveling up or whatever it might be, instead of developing that deeper learning. So quite often where we go wrong, and why it sometimes looks a little bit cringy and feels a little bit cringy when we are gamifying our learning, is because we are focused on the aesthetic. We are focused on making it look like a game rather than making it actually being a game. Because if you are just teaching your lesson and handing out points every time somebody gets a question right, you haven't gamified your lesson, you've just implemented a reward system. And as I say all the time on the show, our children see through that. Children kind of by their nature can be quite cynical, and they will, if you tell them that you are playing a game and actually all you are doing is handing out points, handing out stickers, they will call you on that because it's not a game. So, one of the reasons that gamification goes wrong is when we don't commit to it. And the reason it goes wrong is because it doesn't motivate our students. Remember, the ultimate goal of the gamification of learning is increasing motivation across all of our learners. Some of your learners won't need that motivation because they will love school as much as you do. They will love your subject as much as you do. They will be the kids that you were at school. But not every child in your classroom will be like that. We accept that. But again, as a language teacher, I accept that. Not every child comes to French lessons loving French. I imagine maths teachers, you probably get it a lot as well. When they come, we get, why can't I just use Google Translate? Maths teachers, you guys, and science as well, why can't I just use a calculator? There are all of these ways that they are not motivated, and the point of gamification is to foster that intrinsic motivation. Now, when we talk about intrinsic motivation, we often misconstrue it, because when we create that distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, we always say, intrinsic motivation comes from within. So it's about what the child wants to do. But intrinsic motivation can be trained, because intrinsic motivation is all about discovering the inherent joy of mastery, the inherent joy of autonomy, the inherent joy of purpose. And so if you have this gamified system where you are encouraging autonomy, mastery, purpose in your young people, and you are extrinsically rewarding that so that they have that extrinsic motivation to achieve something, but then they realize that there is joy in mastery. Because maybe they won't achieve mastery without that extrinsic motivation to begin with. That's how you've trained your intrinsic motivation. And that's how you can get your children to start thinking, I want to do this because it feels good to succeed. G in 2007 wrote about the cognitive benefits of gamification. It enhances problem solving. It enhances critical thinking. It enhances engagement. All of these things that are across the curriculum so important. And all of these things that students find difficult to develop on their own and are actually quite hard to teach as a discrete unit. You know, if you ever try to teach a unit on critical thinking, it's really hard. Whereas if you can embed critical thinking skills into your lesson as part of the gamification of your lesson, it's much, much easier. So you could start to implement narrative-based learning, story-based learning, RPGs. Go back and listen to my show from a couple of weeks ago about running your classroom like a dungeon master runs his game, because that's going to encourage meaningful gamification as opposed to just a rewards-based system. The other downside to a rewards-based system, of course, is that the rewards need to mean something. One of the things that I struggled with when I initially implemented my RPG was that my students were leveling up. They were doing what I wanted them to do. They were getting their experience points by getting things right in tests and getting things right on their sheets and all of that. But realistically, the leveling up didn't mean anything. So unless they were actually invested in the game and in the character creation, leveling up didn't actually do anything for them. It was even less of a reward than handing out house points, because at least house points led to their house total increasing. So, you know, reward-based systems, sometimes if the rewards don't mean anything, then they are also pointless, because a reward isn't really a reward if you don't get anything out of it. Now, gimmicky gamification, that's going to be really difficult to say, as I keep saying it, is full of issues, and it can actually do the exact opposite of what we intend. It can actually foster disengagement, because gimmicky gamification can make the children feel patronized. It can make them feel spoken down to. So we need to make sure that our gamification is purposeful. We need to make sure we know exactly why we are gamifying our learning, and that's really going to help us to figure out what we want out of these lessons, what we are expecting our children to achieve. Oh, that was going to be so smooth, a transition into the ads, except I couldn't get out of my PowerPoint fast enough.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
The other downside to gimmicky gamification is that it quite often relies on what we think is enjoyable in a game, or what the gamified system that we've implemented thinks is enjoyable in a game. Again, to use my experience of running my French class like a TTRPG, I like tabletop role-playing games. And so that whole scheme of work relied on my ability to convince the children that tabletop role-playing games were something worth their time. That they were an enjoyable pastime in and of themselves. And so quite often, again, what can happen, what we can do is separate ourselves almost from the kids. We can forget that what we think is fun is not the same as what they think is fun. And we then find ourselves in a situation where not only are we putting our children through this experience that actually is less enjoyable for them than working in their workbook, but we're actually souring our own experience of that thing that we enjoy. There's an old adage that you shouldn't teach your true passion, because when you're surrounded by people who don't enjoy it as much as you, it can kind of suck your passion away. I'm not sure if I believe in that, but I do believe that it's true that sometimes you can spoil something that you enjoy if you share it with people who do not enjoy it so much. I remember once, last day of term before Christmas, had a year 5 class, and I put Muppets Christmas Carol on. Muppets Christmas Carol is one of my favourite Christmas films. The kids didn't like it. They didn't pay attention. They chatted through the whole film. They kind of played their own games in the corner. It wasn't really a big deal, but I was actually quite upset that they didn't like the film as much as I did. I was upset that they didn't enjoy the experience as much as I thought they were going to. I thought I was creating this really nice last day before we go off on Christmas holiday experience, and I failed in that because they didn't enjoy it as much as I was expecting. And I was quite hurt that they didn't enjoy the film as much as I did. And there were a couple of years following where I couldn't watch the film because it had become kind of mired in the memories of that lesson that had gone wrong. So sharing a game system, sharing an idea that you really like, it is risky. It is risky. And I think it takes a very strong teacher to be able to separate out their own feelings about something, their own id, their own ego, from what they're doing in the class. It would have taken a teacher much stronger than I was when I did my Muppets Christmas Carol lesson to have then gone home straight away and watched that film. So I do think it's a risk. I do think it's a risk. But at the same time, I think it's a risk worth taking, so long as you keep certain objectives, so long as you keep certain goals in mind. So Landers in 2014 wrote that gamification should support educational goals, it should not overshadow them. So your learning objectives are right at the heart of the game that you're playing. So you should be able to be asked the question, why are you playing this game? And have the answer rooted in your objective for that lesson. And that, of course, is going to dictate the type of game that you choose to play. For example, a tabletop role-playing game, a TTRPG, is really good for communication. In languages, it's really good to get the children talking in target language. It's not so good for memorizing new vocabulary. It's not so good for memorizing conjugation patterns. So if I were teaching a communication-based course, then using a TTRPG is going to be much more beneficial than if I were teaching a grammar-based course. So the game that you're going to choose is going to come down to what are your objectives for the lesson, the unit, whatever it might be, and also what is your pedagogical outlook. And regardless of what your pedagogical outlook is, there will be a game that will support it. You just need to find what that game is, or what that type of game is. Your game needs to have very clear learning outcomes to make sure that the game mechanics serve the pedagogical purpose. So why have you chosen the specific game that you have chosen, and how does that specific game feed into what your learning goals are? How do the mechanics of your game support what you are doing? So there is a very popular platform, a very popular gamification platform that I very much enjoy as a language teacher because of the repetition that it introduces, because I can plug pieces of vocabulary into this system and it will generate games that just repeats those same pieces of vocabulary over and over again. So the children, in the space of say 10 minutes, however long we're playing the game for, they will see each word 10, 15 times. And we know that repetition is important for retention. And so the game mechanics of that particular platform, where it will repeat things over and over again, it will repeat the same, 7 words in 10 minutes, is what I want to achieve my learning outcome. And it's much more interesting, it's much more engaging than if I were to spend 10 minutes just repeating those same 7 words over and over and over again. So having that game, which does have a leaderboard, it does have points, it does there are packs of things that you can open, and there are rare things that you can collect, and it does tap into all of the things, all of the extrinsic things that alone would be a proxy for learning, that alone would be a bad reason to gamify my lesson. But it does actually have the mechanics that help to support the pedagogy that I believe in. It does have the mechanics to support the repetition that I need. There's a different system which has a spaced repetition mechanic. So it introduces the vocabulary, it plays games with them. It's more of a quiz than a game, to be fair, but it does it. And then when the student has got the answers right enough times, it will stop asking that question for a few days, and then it will bring that question back. And again, we know that spaced repetition is a very good way of getting our students to remember things. So I use that platform because I can justify pedagogically that mechanic in my practice, because I know that spaced repetition works. And it works to help them retain information in a way that dishing out stickers doesn't. And I say this as somebody that loves a good sticker. So, this is not me disparaging stickers. So we really need to make sure that everything about our game, that the mechanics of the game, the content of the game, the time that we spend playing, we need to make sure that all of that supports and underpins our educational goals, that it doesn't overshadow them. Because it's the learning that's important. That learning just happens to be delivered in the form of a game. As we have already talked about, gamification should encourage autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's what we want our students to achieve. That's what we want our children to have. Okay? I want my children to be able to use Chinese in a purposeful way, to have conversations with somebody, to navigate their way around the mainland of China if they need to order something in a restaurant. I want them to be able to do that. In classics, I want my children to be able to use scholarship to support their ideas, to be able to draw on the work of Mary Beard, of Natalie Haynes, whoever it might be, to support their own assertions. And we're doing that as a way of training them to be ready for university when they've got to really nail down that academic register. And I want that autonomy, I want that mastery, I want that purpose. And that's what the gamification can help to develop. So mechanics such as choice-based paths. So again, I'm coming back to my TTRPG element here, where I sit with my students and I give them a choice. You know, are you going to take this path that leads you off to the hut on the chicken leg? Or are you going to take this path that leads you to the ice palace? And I say that in French, and the children discuss. Perhaps they discuss in English, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. And then they tell me in French what they want to do. It's faux high stakes, I suppose, because it's high stakes in the game, because they need to make what they consider to be the right choice within the game. They need to discuss the pros and cons of the house on the chicken leg versus the ice palace. They need to figure out what their ultimate goal within the game for their little party is. But it's actually very, very low stakes, because what they are doing is communicating in their target language to their teacher what choice they want to make in this fictitious world. So they are practicing high stakes language use in a low stakes environment. We're kind of getting the best of both worlds there. It also helps to foster that deep engagement, because they feel like they are co-creating the lesson. They feel like they are co-creating that story. They are on board with what's going on. They are taking control. They are making decisions. And that helps to foster that autonomy, that independence, because they can take it in the way that they find most interesting. I might want them to go over to the hut on the chicken leg because I think that's going to be the most interesting story, but they don't. They want to go to the ice palace. They think that's going to be the most interesting story. That's going to be what keeps them engaged in my lesson. They've made that choice. They've told me what they want, and I can then take that scenario and make sure it fits my ultimate learning objective. Iterative design is very, very important in gamification, which is why quite often it's wrong for us to over-rely on the websites, on the subscriptions that offer a gamified service. because iterative design, testing out the game and being able to adapt it based on what the children are feeling, it helps us to keep them engaged in the way that we want them to be. If we pop them onto a website, let's say that there is a quiz-based website, and they answer questions, and the questions allow them to earn points. And as a teacher, I've got no control over what is input, so I've checked like the set of the quiz to make sure that I've taught all this vocabulary that they're being quizzed on, and that's fine. But then one of my students was away, so they missed a few of the words, and I can't change that. So that inability to adjust those elements might mean that my student isn't as engaged and as motivated because they keep getting this word that's coming up over and over again, and they don't know what it means, and they keep getting it wrong, and that then is demotivating. That said, this is why I quite like that certainly all of the gamified systems that I've used have been relatively short, snappy things. So, they are one-off quizzes, one-off games, and then maybe I can play another one afterwards. And they do last, 7, 8, 9 minutes. Because that way, if it didn't work, if I did have a student who was starting to feel demotivated, then in that time before I start the next game, I could switch it up. I could change my system. I could change the vocabulary set, whatever it might be. And so even though I can't necessarily change what is there within the website, because somebody else has designed that for me, and I'm very grateful for that because I can't design websites, I am able to make these quick adjustments that might help to bring the students back on board. But that also raises a bit of an issue in two ways. First of all, as a teacher, you have got to be confident enough to make these rapid changes, to say, oh, okay, there were some words in that set that I hadn't taught you before. Really sorry about that, everybody. Let's try this one instead, and let's see if we have a better time playing this game. But it also does run a little bit against, if you're being observed, the idea of handing in and following a lesson plan. But let's be honest, all of our teaching should be reactive anyway. All of our teaching should be iterative because we should be changing what we're doing based on how our students are responding to it. That is what I would say. But running your own game, running a TTRPG, whatever it might be, that allows you to take on student feedback, either explicit feedback where they tell you what they liked, what they didn't, what they're finding difficult, or implicit feedback where you are reading them, where you are figuring out the class dynamics, the body language, and adjusting the game accordingly to make sure that they are having a good time, to make sure that they are enjoying it. And this is one of the ways that gamification can feel cringe, is when you are just pushing through anyway, when you sit with that mentality of, oh, well, it's a game, so of course they're enjoying it, but they're sitting there hating every second. We can't assume that a lesson is going to be enjoyable just because it's a game. We still have to be able to respond to the feedback that we're getting. We still have to be able to adjust the way that we're teaching, to adjust the style of the game in order to make it work. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I told the story, I think, a few times on the show about how I set up my TTRPG for a year 10 class. Tiny class. There were 4 of them, 4 boys, and I set up this kind of magic school system. The topic we were doing was school. So I thought, okay, brilliant. I can teach classrooms, I can teach subjects, I can teach descriptions of teachers, all that sort of thing. And we can do it in this magical school setting. And I set up this conflict where the idea was there was I don't even remember exactly what it was. There was a MacGuffin of some kind. There was like this magical item that they had to find, and it was buried in the school somewhere. And in my head, the four boys would work collaboratively in order to find this item. What I hadn't anticipated was that they would set out against each other, and that they would almost make it a race. They became each other's antagonists to race to get this item first. And the game did ultimately fall apart because it didn't matter what I did. The fact that they had set out to deliberately antagonize each other in the game meant that every single mission that they tried to go on was failed. And ultimately, I scrapped the game because I wasn't enjoying it. They were getting frustrated with each other because they were kind of setting each other up for failure, and it just wasn't working. But it wasn't wasted time because I had still taught school subjects and classrooms and how to describe teachers. They still had those skills. They still picked those skills up. And I think sometimes when we gamify, because gamification gets quite a bad rep, sometimes we have to feel that it must go perfectly every single time. Otherwise, the teachers who are against gamification are going to turn around and say, I told you so. You know, you've wasted all of that time. You should have just used the textbook. But if your learning outcomes, if your objectives are there at the heart of your game, even if the game goes wrong, your children will still have learned, which ultimately is the most important thing, ultimately is what we are here for. Gamification should also make sure that the children are being challenged whilst being engaged. And I think sometimes we feel like that's a bit antithetical. And so sometimes we make our games a bit too easy because we want them to enjoy the idea. But if the game itself is enjoyable, if the mechanic is enjoyable, if the mechanic is successful, then the children will have a good time, even if it is intellectually rigorous at, you know, whatever level you are working at. And this is why I believe that gamification can work at all levels. It's why I don't think that gamification is for primary schools only, or for, you know, education up to GCSE only. I think it can work at every level because you can gamify any concept. You're teaching about immigration in A-level Spanish. You can set up a tabletop game about migrating from one country to another. You know, what challenges are the characters in the game facing? What red tape do they have to get through? What do the NPCs, with the non-playable characters who live in the country that your pupil's characters are migrating into, how do they feel about it? And while you're doing that, not only are you managing to teach like the statistics and the language and all of the stuff that is on the syllabus, you are also helping to engage their empathy. You are helping to engage their understanding of people. You're helping to engage their problem-solving skills. You are helping to engage their engagement with the wider world. Because unlike a game that takes place in a magic school, a game of people migrating is real. It is something that people go through. And maybe somebody in your class wants to become an immigration lawyer, and so that game will help them in the future. It will kind of sow the seeds of what they're going to have to do in the future, all while achieving your learning objective. I've talked before on the show about how, time is a premium, and we've got to make sure that we are making the most of every single minute in the classroom, that we are using it to its fullest. And sometimes when you gamify your learning, you can be accused of wasting time. But how many things can you teach in 1 hour of role play? How many different skills can you get across in that time compared to that same hour just spent with a textbook? So when you are creating your gamified system, when you're creating the game for whatever it is that you are teaching, don't dumb it down. Still make sure that you are achieving your objectives, that you are achieving everything that you are setting out to do. Because the mechanics of the game, it can make even the most complicated concepts simple. It can help your children to succeed, even when it doesn't look like they're going to, as long as you've planned it properly. And I think ultimately, that's where we fail in gamification, is when we don't plan it. When we think that our game can be sticking on one of the websites that we're subscribed to as our starter, instead of taking the functionality of that website and building our entire lesson around it. Because using that website as your starter, as your plenary, or as a reward, if you get through this page in the textbook, then we will play this game. That's fine. But all that actually does is it superficially builds a rewards-based system. It gives the kids that dopamine hit that they want, and maybe they'll walk out of your classroom going, oh, that was so much fun, and that makes you feel good as the teacher. But the other 40 minutes of that 50-minute lesson didn't engage them in the same way. Whereas if you took the mechanic of that website and you looked at it and you said, right, I'm going to use this quiz of vocabulary that I've never taught them before as my starter, as an elicitation to see how we do. Then I'm going to take that same vocabulary and I'm going to teach it to them via this game, via this Pelmanism, perhaps. Then we're going to go back into that first game and we're going to play it again, the exact same quiz. We're going to do it again, and we're going to see how they've improved. And they're going to drop their score down. Then we're going to come back and we're going to teach that vocabulary again in a different way. We're going to see it in a reading passage. Then we're going to go back and play that quiz again. Third time we've played it, how have they improved? Then that same vocabulary, I'm going to do a listening on because it's in this song. Then we're going to go back and, oh, my time is nearly up, so I'm going back into that quiz for the fourth time. How have they improved? And I've then used that game system not only to keep that fun motivation going, but as a way of physically showing their improvement. And I know what you're thinking. Well, what if my very bright student gets 100% in the quiz the first time? What happens then? And that's a very good question. That's a very good question. To which I would say, well, what would have happened in that lesson anyway? If you didn't know that child already knew all of that vocabulary, what would have happened? You would have taught your lesson teaching that same vocabulary, and that child would still have walked out not having learnt anything. You just wouldn't have known about it. So what the gamification has done in that context is it's shown you straight away, oh, actually, this child already knows this stuff that my lesson is about. For her, I need to pull out something different. That makes your teaching adaptive. That means that you are meeting that individual child's needs in a way that you wouldn't have done had you not tried to gamify that lesson.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Now, I'm not going to lie, when I planned this show, what I thought was going to happen was I was going to come here and give you a whole list of things to avoid, like a list of websites that you shouldn't be using, or a list of types of games that you shouldn't do because that's all gimmicky and it doesn't work. But what I've actually learned by reviewing the literature, by thinking on this week, and reflecting on my own practice over the past almost 20 years, is that there is a place for all game systems. There is a place for every single website that exists to gamify learning. The free ones, the subscription ones, they all have a place. Everything that exists as a game can be implemented properly in a non-cringe way into your lessons. But it's got to be done deliberately. And, I don't know if this is just me, maybe this is just my obsession. So I'm reading it into everything that I do. But the more we do these kind of shallow dives in the show, the more I read through the literature, the more I realize that it all ultimately comes down to deliberate practice. Your gamification of your learning is going to be successful and it's going to be not cringe if you've done it deliberately. If you know exactly why it's in your lesson, if you've planned why it's in your lesson, if you've planned the part of your lesson, or parts, if you're using it more than once, of your lesson that it goes in, and you know exactly why it's there. I think quite often, gamification of learning comes across as being cringe or pointless or a waste of time or whatever, when it isn't planned, when it's there just because you've got 5 minutes to fill and jumping on website X is the first thing that comes to mind, or when you know that the kids did this game in physics and they really enjoyed it, so you're going to use it in your textiles lesson, without kind of figuring how it fits into your textiles curriculum. Because, again, that's what the students can see through. They can see through when you are saying to them, oh yeah, we're doing this because it's fun, but actually you're doing it just because you're filling time, or just because you want to be the popular teacher, or whatever your motivation might be. Because when it comes down to it, we don't want to waste their time. We don't want their school experience to be pointless. And so if you are just using games as a time filler, and that's the only way that you use games, then it's cringe. Because it is wasting everybody in that room's time. Whereas if you have a reason for using your game, if it fully supports why they are there, they know why they're in that classroom because we insist on writing objectives on the whiteboard. So they know full well why they're there. If the game supports that and it builds up those structures of autonomy and of mastery and of purpose, and they teach cross-curricular skills about empathy, about problem solving, about justification, and they teach the point of your lesson. They teach your base metals. They teach your parts of the circulatory system, whatever it is that you might be teaching. Then it's not cringe anymore, because it has a point, it has a purpose. It's all about being purposeful. It's all about being deliberate. Everything, I'm realizing, is about deliberate practice. And it's about really thinking through every single lesson that you do and knowing why you do it. Not just playing a game because they enjoyed it with somebody else. Not just introducing a gamified unit because it worked with the class that you had last year, and so you assume it's going to work with the class that you've got this year. It's about always making those very deliberate, very purposeful decisions and really taking the time to think about why you are teaching something in the way that you are teaching it. So gamification needs to enhance and not distract from learning. Don't undermine your own subject by going, oh, well, this is boring, so let's do it as a game. Use the game as a way to teach other skills, to really show off the joy of your subject, the enjoyment of your subject. Gamification needs to prioritize meaningful engagement over extrinsic rewards. The reason that we gamify isn't so that we can give out more merit badges, it's so that we can get the children to engage. And that quite often gets a bit of a bad rep, doesn't it? Well, if you need to play a game in order to get your children to engage, you're not a very good teacher. You need to be more engaging. Maybe you need to build some relationships with them. Or maybe you just play the game, because games are fun and games are engaging and the children will like it. But ultimately, if that's what's going to get them to engage with your content, that's the only thing that matters. And make sure that you are using evidence-based gamification to ensure long-term impact. If anybody from any of the gamification websites out there happens to stumble on this show, one of the best things that I as a teacher think you can do to get people to subscribe to you is to tell me why your system works. Show me the evidence, point me towards the evidence that proves what you have got on your website has long-term impact, because that's what I want to do. That's what I want to know. When I introduced my TTRPG for the first time, I did so much research. I did so much reading on the introduction of role-playing games into the classroom. I read things that other teachers have published. I read things that academics have published to really make sure that it was a rigorously approved, sound pedagogical approach. I play a game usually in my very first language classes with students. I call it the toilet paper game. It's one that I read in a 101 Icebreakers book when I started teaching, but it's still one of my favorites. And the reason that it works isn't because kids find toilet paper a bit funny and you can make some jokes about how, the roll has never been anywhere near a bathroom, I absolutely promise. And, the taking the paper off of the roll can be quite funny because of the mechanics of the game and all of that. It works because it distracts them from speaking. It works because they are out of their head in terms of thinking about what they're going to say, and they are focused about what I make them do with the toilet paper. They bundle it up and they've got to try and get it in the bin. So they are so focused on their throw and their aim that they forget to be scared about speaking. And that's why that works. And so the reason that I play that game is because I know why it works. And what I can then do is make suggestions to other teachers. Oh, this is actually what you want out of the game. I understand that you don't want to sacrifice a roll of toilet paper, so why don't you play it in this way? And if you then, particularly if you work in a department, if you're in secondary, let's say you're a secondary geography department and there are 5 of you, and you want to gamify your curriculum, but obviously you don't want all of your classes to be doing exactly the same games over and over again, because they will get bored of that. That won't be engaging anymore. Taking that same idea, distracting them from the fact that they're scared about speaking, and finding your own approach, finding a different way to do it, means you've then got 5 or 6 different games that can be played. So really make sure that you understand why you are playing these games. Really look into the research behind behind what the game is trying to do, and make sure you understand why you're using that specific game. Because then you can branch out. All right, that is us for today. Thank you very, very much. I hope that that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you found it interesting, that you have taken something from it. As I always say, the point of me being here is just to kind of share my interests and my experiences, but it's not about me. It's about us as a community of practice, as I will talk about at TTR Connect in a couple of weeks' time. And it's about all of us who are engaged in working with children, whether we are teachers or not, because I know that not everybody in my audience is a teacher. It's about us knowing that we can work together and learning from each other. So now I'd like to sign off. If you have listened back to this, please do remember to drop us a review wherever you are listening, because that very much helps not just me, but Teachers Talk Radio in general. And also let me know your thoughts on gamification, because I will be really interested to engage in conversation with you. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend, whatever you are doing. Hopefully what you are doing is staying here on Teachers Talk Radio to listen to some of the other amazing shows that we've got coming up. But if you are off doing other things, I hope you have a great time, and I am already looking forward to having breakfast with you next Saturday. Thank you very, very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.